preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. I'm Dan Stern, Director of Humanities here at the 92nd Street Y, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the fourth evening in our series, The Shape of the City, in which some of today's more extraordinary architects discuss how they feel about the vision of environment, the vision of construction, and the vision of just the way we live, work, and play in the areas we do this in. The final event will take place next Monday evening, November 7th at 8:15. I'll have a note on the ticketing about that, I'll tell you in a moment. But first I want to, in fact I think I'll do it now so I can get on to talking about Paul Goldberger, for whom I have the greatest admiration, and I do not wish to mix up the talk about tickets with talk about Paul. Next week will be James Polchek Associates, and it is November 7th. Please bring, because we've changed people around and people have had other dates and we've had to shift people, there may be some confusion. So please bring, if you have a ticket at home that says Polchek and November 7th, bring it. If you should have by any chance one that says BumpZoid, bring it. Bring the whole ticket. In either case, arrive at the door, you'll come in, and you'll have a wonderful evening. Okay. On to our moderator, Paul Goldberger, who is the kind of the guiding vision man behind this entire series. He's been architecture critic of the New York Times since 1973 and its senior architecture critic since 1981. In 1984, Paul was awarded the highest award in journalism, the Pulitzer Prize, for distinguished criticism in recognition of his writings on architecture for the Times. He's a graduate of Yale and has been visiting lecturer since 1984 at that university's School of Architecture, where he teaches the course in architectural criticism. He's also a member of the Board of Overseers of Parsons School of Design. In addition to the Pulitzer Prize, he is the recipient of the Medal of the American Institute of Architects for his architecture criticism, the President's Medal of the Municipal Arts Society of New York for his efforts to save the Lever House, and the Roger Starr Journalism Award from the Citizens Housing and Planning Council for his articles about planning and air rights in New York. Mr. Goldberger is the author of The City Observed, New York, An Architectural Guide to Manhattan, The Skyscraper, On the Rise, Architecture and Design in a Postmodern Age, many articles in leading architectural periodicals, as well as essays for books on works of contemporary architects. He is now at work on a book that deals with the experience of looking at architecture. In fact, I can think of no one else who can possibly guide our eyes in the way we look at things in our environment the way Paul Goldberger can. And Paul will introduce our guests, who are two gentlemen with the corporate name of BumpZoid from New York. And now, please welcome Paul Goldberger. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the fourth of this year's series of 5 evenings. Tonight our guests are, it's our first and only evening this year with a firm rather than a single guest, Ben Benedict and Carl Pucci, who together run BumpZoid, a firm that in its relatively short existence has risen very quickly in New York and in the country to be considered one of the leading young design firms around. They are both graduates of Yale College and the Yale School of Architecture. Unlike many, they served as brief an apprenticeship as possible with other firms and very rapidly went into business themselves, first in New Haven and then when they were ready to bring their show to Broadway to New York. Carl Pucci was raised in Levittown, Long Island, where his architectural consciousness began to form. Ben Benedict had no such privileged upbringing architecturally. He comes from Connecticut. They met, I believe at least, at Yale, and have been partners ever since, first in New Haven, as I said, and then in New York. They've both taught as well and served as both guest critics and lecturers. And Carl Pucci is a founder of Zero magazine and the Accademia Mezzanotte as well. Our format for this evening, as before and as always in this series, will be a brief prelude or overture of visual images. Carl and Ben will present a series of slides that I think are of their work, and we'll just introduce them quickly to you, and then the magic dance will occur on the stage once again, and the screen will disappear, and we'll sit down and talk about both the work you've seen and then anything else that we go to. And then finally, the third part of the evening will be your own questions. So now please join me in welcoming Ben Benedict and Carl Pucci. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben Benedict, and I think we'll just run right directly into the slides. We've got on the screen a little bit of history here. As young, just out of school, almost architects, desperate for commissions, we were given the addition of a garage to a suburban house in Connecticut. And trying to make something out of very little, we decided that really the metaphor that should be followed is the basketball backboard. And so this is one we in fact also built this with our own hands. And tonight, on Halloween night, as every night for the past many years, the owner will be out with a loaded revolver guarding his basketball backboard.
The work, we'll go quickly if we can. How are we going to do this? This is sort of like getting awards. This is a swimming pool in Rumson, New Jersey, which has a mystical pyramidic entrance. We were interested in the sort of hedonism of the suburban swimming pool. I don't think we need to say any more about that.
Next slide is in Virginia. This is a small house for two elderly women, all on one floor. We thought that the mysteries of the Nile, the pyramids and the sphinxes, should be introduced to this portion of the countryside, and therein you'll see our inspiration.
Replete with 50-foot tail. Before and after. Perfectly nice Ozzie and Harriet house. This is a story of a tall ego. Owners who wanted an aggressive house by the water. We gave it to them, replete with images of Zeus and Poseidon, of lightning bolts and waves.
History has a way of informing gently sometimes, and the front porch of a house in Litchfield County in Connecticut was the inspiration for an addition that we did on the back side of the house, which contains screened-in porch and kitchen and etc.
Moving back into town, again, the context is always of some importance to our work. In this case, when working on the Upper East Side, restoring a parlor floor, bringing a brownstone stoop back into the neighborhood, but also introducing a new motif of plate steel, which carries through on the details of the new entry doors as well.
When faced with a characterless Park Avenue apartment, we decided to run Park Avenue through the middle of the apartment. You can see that the niche shown on the left side is shown in detail on the right. Underground tracks, Park Avenue above, and the building facades on the side. That also serves as a way of organizing what was a rather disorganized set of rooms.
In Soho, a little bit freer use of objects to define a space, trying to keep a large room, but put a series of, in this case, pyramids and glass huts to give some definition to the spaces within.
On Fifth Avenue, a home overlooking the reservoir, the joining of two apartments and the knitting together of these two apartments shown on the right side, and the rather glorious sunny room shown on the left.
And on Riverside Drive, a more spare environment, open behind from where the picture is taken, open to the views of the water. And on the right, etched glass doors leading to the kitchen, which include the tree canopy of Central Park in 1860 and the tree covering of Central Park today. If you have Riverside Park on one side of your apartment, why not have Central Park on the other?
Again, a joining of two apartments, this time in Greenwich Village. The yield was a rather long room that we took advantage of to put in this ceiling that divides the room into three sections and gives a very bright and big space for a small Greenwich Village apartment.
In this case, the table as well picks up on the detail of the ceiling throughout the space. And then, because as young architects we don't usually get to do skyscrapers, we decided we would do a few anyway. And this is a small world for a 7-year-old boy, replete with towers, and a metaphorically incomplete tower which goes over his pillow and lets him dream about visions of the city at night.
Lately, we seem to be doing a number of law offices. This is one of them. It's in the Lipstick Building on 3rd Avenue and tries to take some of its shape and inspiration from that building. You can see the intersection of this through hallway with the outer skin is repeated on the ceiling, and a number of proportional systems that express themselves throughout the space are at first presented here in the entryway, shown on the left as you come off the elevators, looking through the whole building to the City Corp in the distance, and on the right, looking back towards the elevators and the entry, and over the top of the stair that links the floors together.
In this case, the football shape of the building led to some hash mark motifs which go along the paneling in the entry. Same project, trying to move people out to the corridor, to move along this, I should say, rare space in Manhattan, a curving curtain wall. We thus put a new curtain wall just within, which enclosed conference rooms, library, etc., but still allowed people to get to the outside of the building in their everyday passage.
This is a house we did in Virginia as well. It's we created the water and cleared the hill, and ended up with a very big elevation on the pond and a very small elevation that you enter in from behind. Some of the dual character of the farm was picked up in the formality of the house, the columns and the pediment, and the barn buildings which surround the house were echoed by the very solid simple base.
Inside, the spaces are organized simply by a series of columns and beams. The columns are linked either on the short side or the long side to define whether you're moving through columns or seeing through columns on the small windows on the north side or the large windows on the south side. The right side is the stairway that tumbles down to the water along the large window wall.
This is a recent apartment that we did, that we tried to inject a new proportional system into. What you're seeing on the left side is the view back into the main entry hall through a set of doors, and a detail of how that works on the right side. Glass and steel have become part of the vocabulary in this apartment by their introduction in the front hall.
The glass doors allow variations in privacy between dining and entry areas and living, and the basic proportional system is taken from the steel frame sash of the existing building, a 50s white brick building, the type of which most of you should probably know. And then on the right is what was a country kitchen was asked for, and that was as close as BumpZoid could come. Trying to keep it reasonably formal and feel part of the rest of the space, and at the same time get a little bit more cozy with the use of milk paint and natural cherry wood. And I think that's all.
Okay, we will be right back. You didn't expect we'd be here, did you? That was great. I suppose I should start not with the work, but by asking you which of you is Bump and which of you is Zoid, or how does it work?
My turn? Yeah. I'm Zoid.
Okay.
And Ben is Bump. And there's a history behind it.
Okay.
I suppose you want to hear it. The long story is that Ben was working as a Bump Conception and Erection in New Haven, Connecticut, design build firm. And I was working as BumpZoid Construction, named after Hunter S. Thompson's Gonzo School of Journalism. When we started working together, Zoid Bump just didn't seem appropriate, and we've
Also would have put you at the end of the phone book, too.
so we've been BumpZoid ever since.
You've both actually done a fair amount of physical construction yourselves, right? I mean, your early days were, in fact, doing design build stuff, you said. You think that's affected your work at all?
Yeah, I think so. Originally, it was a matter of necessity for income as well as interest. But I think
Well, there are young architects who sort of, instead of physically building them, seem to have such an aversion to physically building anything that they would rather make drawings and then work as a waiter somewhere than do anything that's physically connected to the actual act of building.
Well, that wasn't true for us. We
Right.
both like to do that and continue that in small ways on projects. One of the things that we showed tonight, in fact, demanded that on a weekend we go and help the contractor frame the roof because he had hit the end of his abilities. But I think it really has helped us, in not only in terms of designing things, but in terms of getting things built the way we want to have them built. Contractors have a much more difficult time fooling us about what can and can't be done.
And I think we always thought of it as a means to an end. What we're really concerned with is architecture and building something the way we wanted it. And
Right.
this was a way to get at that early, more than the love of just building. So we don't build other people's stuff.
Because there does seem in your work to be a real sense of, I mean, there's a wonderful tactile sense to it. I mean, it is about materials as well as about visual ideas and about the connections between materials and so forth.
Well, I think that's true. The office is a pile of stone and steel, and we're always having samples built and delivered at the last minute. This afternoon we had a presentation, and the last minute there was several kinds of wood and details delivered from a shop that we'd had made. We like working with things, up close, and I think that does come through.
Your work seems, obviously it's funny. And just as obviously, I'm pretty sure you don't want it to be thought of only as funny. Can we talk about that for a minute? Just about the whole question of how far you can go with humor in architecture before it becomes a kind of albatross, or can it become an albatross? Can it become something that defines you too closely or not?
Well, certainly it can.
Right.
Don't want to wander too far here, but yesterday in the book review, George Bernard Shaw's biographer said he was having problems coming to the grips with the fact that Shaw derives serious thoughts from jokes.
Right.
And how could this possibly be? I think that was something that I immediately felt close to.
Right.
We're very serious about what we do, and frankly,
Really, we are, really.
And the humor is it's just another weapon in our architectural bag, as far as we're concerned. And it's very, I don't want to use the word humanist, but we're not abstract rationalists. We don't have a single design that we use to answer every problem. So we are interested in people's problems and their lives, and humor is a big part of how we get at our clients and how we understand them and how we make comment on those situations.
Your work, in fact, seems to have relied, as the years have gone on, as you've become more established, less on humor as a primary visual element. I mean, the humor becomes more of a footnote and less of a... I think after the great basketball garage, which I guess is sort of for you like Robert Venturi's Mother's House. I mean, it's this sort of early icon. I can't really think of anything in which humor has become so much the partie, in effect, of the job.
Well, I think that's true. For me, it not only is it a matter of personal style for us, but in the day-to-day workings of the office. But I've always seen it very much in literary terms, that humor is one of the things that we bring to our work that makes the whole. And these days we tend to deliver the funny lines a little bit more softly and a little bit more straight-faced, maybe as a part of age and maybe as a part of being beaten down by the process of trying to get your buildings built on time, on budget.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What led you, speaking of, when you talk about beaten down, it makes it inevitable that we talk about New York. You started the firm in New Haven. You came together in New Haven.
We came here to be beaten down.
So you came here to be beaten down. I mean, that's really what I'm getting at. What led you to give up what could have been a promising practice in the state of Connecticut to come here to be beaten down? And when did you, and how did it all work?
Well,
I sort of vaguely remember when you did, but not what year.
I don't remember what year it was either, but
the end of the 70s sometime. We've been here about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was just the time, our time professionally, being out of school several years and wanting to get on to other things. Part of it was the times in general, where building things in the country had a little bit less appeal, or we wanted to see a little bit more of the big city. And ultimately, although our firm is small and probably always will be small, there is the notion that we would like to do work eventually that had more impact on the public, that the work might be, more people might participate in the process of getting it built, and more people might enjoy it rather than building a single home in the country. I'm not sure we've come to that point yet, but that's the part of the appeal of the city was that was there.
There are still some differences between your work and John Portman's, who was here last week. That's true. Although when I hear you say that, philosophically, the distance.
I think he has a hoop on his house, though. Doesn't he?
At least one.
It's not neon, though.
No, it wasn't. No.
No. It was actually carved of granite. That's his hoop. No, it's true. His squiggles were inspired by BumpZoid, weren't they?
Well, also, you have the choice. You can go to work for IMPay and become a builder of large buildings, and classmates of ours have done that.
Right.
Our choice was to go to work and maybe end up building something approaching the scale of IMPay's work at the end of our career.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to get at too. I mean, you guys really both chose to avoid that. I know, Carl, you worked for a little while for Davis Brody, right? But basically, you've had very little experience with big firms and with large-scale work. Was it a feeling that better to have complete control over small projects than to have some tiny little role in great things that you couldn't ultimately influence, or what?
Well, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, that was the most important thing. And I think it's a reasonable way to learn too, and a way that generations of architects have learned. You go and you're out there, and it was just us, and we were doing whatever we could.
Fewer seem to do it now. That's what interests. That's, I think, the thing so interesting. I mean,
I think it's very hard. It turns out,
right?
Surprisingly to us, I think.
The clients were not lined up down Fifth Avenue to sort of.
And we run an office, so that the reward is certainly still the architecture, but we spend so much more time finding clients, administrating jobs, beating contractors on the head, doing the kind of things that you forget an architect really has to do. I think that in the end, we probably have a much more professional office than many small offices because of that learning track. People who come from larger offices to our office, who've worked in larger offices, really have very little idea of how a job really gets built. They've never met clients. They've very rarely been on the job.
If you work for IMPay, you're not allowed to meet the client.
Right.
I think
they don't know what the ramifications
are. 12 layers removed from the client.
Right. They don't have insurance problems, etc.
Right.
So it's painful, but it still seems rewarding.
Do you guys each have design responsibility for particular projects, or do you both work on all of them? How do you divide that? I know that you're both designers. It's not that one of you does design and the other does administration.
Well, I'm better than Ben, though.
So that the clients who pay more get you and the others get Ben. Is that how it works? They're two rates, sort of,
We're equally bad at administration, though.
Okay.
No, we design everything together, and that is an interesting and sometimes impossible situation. But once the primary impetus for the design has been laid down, one of the partners will take over the job and develop the design with input from the other partner and from other people in the office, and be primarily responsible for that job in construction.
How many other people are there in the office?
At the moment, 3 designers. 3 other designers.
3 other designers and
administrative.
right. So total of how many bodies? How many people?
6 counting the secretary.
Right, how many people work there is what I was saying. To which you could answer about half, but
No, there's five people trained in architecture and an administrative person. Running a small office, there's an interesting phenomenon in New York, which is that there are a lot of very capable freelance people
right,
out there. People who basically are building a house for their mother and have no other work, who have a lot of experience and can be hired by us to do work on one particular
on a per job basis.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
we
that-
take advantage of that as well.
That's what we do if we have a big presentation that's coming up. Every square foot of the office is occupied by people.
Right. Okay, good. Let's talk a little more about the work itself, to get back there. To go to one of the recent, or relatively recent jobs, I don't know the date, you showed us, which is the Park Avenue apartment. Let me play the devil's advocate about the Park Avenue thing. On one level, obviously, it's really neat and fun and funny and all that. Does it run the risk of appearing to be a kind of one-liner? I mean, that was my concern when I saw it, that it's sort of, it's great looking, it's funny, it's a neat concept, but is it kind of a one-liner that doesn't sustain continued exposure over and over again?
Well, hopefully not. And we don't see it primarily, again, as a joke, but we see the
Right.
joke as one aspect of it.
Sure. Even if we don't even call it a joke, let's just call it a metaphor.
Well-
Which, I mean, you can suddenly give it great profundity by calling it a metaphor instead of a joke. Does the metaphor run the risk of being too literal and too direct rather than subtle enough to be
Perhaps.
sustainable?
Yes. I think there is that risk, and for the most part, we're willing to take that risk. When it comes to our point in the office of saying, does this go too far? Will this be silly? We sort of prod ourselves and occasionally will risk that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need the burden of seriousness,
Right.
and it's everything that suggests. In that particular case, it was really an architectural problem that gave rise to what we're not calling a joke.
Right. The metaphor.
The metaphor.
Right.
An apartment that had a living room and dining room with very different elevations, and we developed a dual wall that allowed one elevation for a living room on one side, another elevation for a dining room on the other side, and in order to get those two elevations to meet, the void
Mm-hmm.
was really the solution. Once we had the void, Park Avenue slipped in naturally.
Right. Right.
And then the materiality is very important. I mean, it is crafted absolutely. Granite and marble, etched glass, zodiac on the sky,
Right.
so that it becomes a tactile object that is interesting visually, even when we take the cars down. We glue the cars up for the photograph,
Mm-hmm.
but they do come down, and often there's a very nice vase of flowers in there.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly the joke is a little bit more subtle
Yeah.
and
Right.
maybe a little richer.
Right. Okay. There is, I think, throughout all the work, a wonderful ability to respond to existing conditions and use them as the inspiration for what I think one at their best could be called more profound or subtle interventions of one kind or another. I mean, I particularly like I actually know the last apartment you showed, which is in as you said, a very ordinary early 50s building, in which you seem to have found architecture by getting down to the essence of that building and bringing it out, rather than covering it up and putting a bunch of Corinthian columns in it and so forth. I mean, it has not been given richness by denial of the existing condition of the building.
we proposed the Corinthian columns as the first
clients just
scheme.
wouldn't do it, huh? All right, well, there you are.
Context is very important to us. We don't have the same bag of tricks that we continue to sell
Right.
to people. We do draw on projects that haven't been haven't been built to fuel some of our new work, but context is very important to us in terms of inspiration. We do try and get to know our clients, even if they're corporate clients, and we do try and take into account what we're dealing with when we go there. So, in this instance, all we had to work with was the essence, and that's what we used.
And the context, I mean, the context can be literally physical context,
Right.
as it is in that case. Context can be the age of the building, its location. It can be, as Ben says, the client's wishes and desires. And the context can be more abstract as well. I mean, I think in the case of the little swimming pool with the surrealist entrance,
Right.
the context there was really the owner's collection of super realist paintings. In some cases, that context is an idea of proportion that is hanging around the site for whatever reason or for whatever history. So all of those things, I mean, the historic context, the physical context, the client's context, and the abstract context all hopefully come into play.
Right. I think that's certainly clear with the law office you showed us too, in the Lipstick Building, where you seem to, I mean, an awful lot of people have done an awful lot of work in that building in the last year or two. You seem to be the only people who decided to really go with the building as opposed to fighting it. In fact, I thought that you seemed to be much more responsive to the realities of that building than Philip Johnson's own office in it, which sort of,
Absolutely right.
Well,
which denies it completely, even though he designed it.
We had the benefit of seeing his office though before we did ours.
and we knew better than to cross Philip Johnson.
Yeah, even the palette of colors
Yeah.
refers very closely to the building. We thought that was important. We doubt we'll have the opportunity ever again to design a building with that plan.
Do you like the building?
Not particularly.
I don't know that anyone does, but it's.
But
Carl? Yeah.
No, I guess I don't like the building either. But I think it, as we may have mentioned, it gives rise to a problem and allowed us to do things that I think you don't get in any other commercial buildings in the city.
Right.
That curving facade and the experience of walking up 3rd Avenue along that facade inside the building and all that glass, if you can get to that, if your interior plan allows it, that seemed something worth saving and keeping and playing on.
No, it's very exciting. When you come down the stairs, you feel like you're coming down the stairs into the.
I'm tumbling onto the sidewalk.
Yeah. It's really very dramatic, and so the stairs are curved, and we made it a stair that you could fall down if you wanted to. But it really does respond to the building.
Right. You're doing more of that kind of work now, right? Not falling downstairs. I mean, more commercial work, more offices, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, our projects are slowly growing in size as we
Is that
go.
because your clients are getting older and richer, or because you're becoming better known? Or
Our college
what?
classmates are now in positions of power, and they hire us.
Finally haven't.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
It's a long wait.
So the real lesson of architecture is wait it out, I guess, right?
Yeah, stick with it.
Stick with it. What have you ever done any like so many architects now, restaurants or stores or storefronts, any of that stuff?
No, our last store was a store that we did in New Haven before we came to New York, and we may have been first on the list because no one had any experience doing combined health food and shoe stores. And so we started out on an equal basis with all the other architects in town.
Okay.
It turned out that Indo-Islamic was the appropriate style. It was quite successful.
Does that store still exist?
I don't think so.
About 6 months later, it closed.
Even in booming New Haven, there's not a great demand for combined health food shoes. For healthy shoes, did they sell?
Yeah.
Or
They were very good for your feet, those.
right. And if they weren't, the food tasted like leather, so it was all the same. Have you thought? I was about to say that kind of work, but maybe I should just. Have you thought retail or restaurant work in the city?
Yeah, we have both. I think both of us are very bad at the dance that goes on with partners, and most of our work comes by reference. We have very few clients who are displeased with our work, and so as the pyramid of clients grows, the types of work grows too.
Right. Let's talk a little more about the whole process of getting clients when you are still, after all, a small firm, and even though I know it doesn't always feel like this, a young firm still. Is it really word of mouth? Is it references from previous clients that bring other clients primarily?
Absolutely. That really is the only thing that's been successful in our case. Having work published has not really brought directly any work that
nobody ever reads the press. We know that.
And so it's hard to say where the next job comes from or why it comes to. Maybe we often wonder why we're not doing hot bars in the Lower East Side, or or the latest.
Because you're too old to be trendy.
Restaurant.
You're too young to design skyscrapers, and you're too old to do trendy bars on the East Side, right?
And we're actually a little.
So you're middle aged.
I have my bell bottoms in a trunk, though. I'm ready for.
That's why you don't do bars on the Lower East Side. It's now very clear.
But I think we're sort of comfortable with being out of fashion.
Mm-hmm.
We were fashionable. I mean, the basketball hoop was probably the last time we were fashionable. And now we're in a position where I think we do very good work. We're very concerned with how it's built,
right?
What it looks like, how it's made, how it gets used, that the clients are reasonably content, and that it is architecture, that it is not just built work.
Right.
That it is serious design work.
Right.
That makes us a little slow. That makes us a little less than patient with some trendy things.
Right.
I think that tends to we're getting certain kinds of clients and not clients who are opening bars
right.
immediately.
What makes an ideal client?
For my money, it's somebody who is interested in architecture, and it seems that the best educated people make the best clients. That they're interested in ideas, and they're willing to discuss ideas with you, and if they're willing to enter into a dialogue with you, you can sell them almost anything.
Have you turned down jobs ever?
Yeah, lots of jobs.
Lots of jobs.
Yes.
What kind of jobs do you turn down, and why?
We turn down people we think are insincere.
Mm-hmm.
We've turned down people who are overly idealistic.
Right. What does that mean?
People who there are a lot of people who come to you who expect you to change their lives by building them an apartment, and although not confident enough to recommend psychiatric help,
that's really what they want, right?
It's really what they're That's really what they're
Let's
after.
build a house and fix the marriage. So,
Right. Well, there's a lot of that. You know, I mean, every
Well-
architect has faced that.
And we even in lean times, we've tried to stay away from that kind of work.
Right.
and I guess the other kind of job we turn down are the people who want inspired sketches, the people who think that architecture can be tossed off in 15 minutes of inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
That, come show me what you can do for a half hour, and I'll give you. In the last case, it was 200 houses in the Caribbean, in a condo on a little island that wasn't big enough to hold 50 houses. So that kind of attitude about what architecture is, I guess we're not really ready to roll and step into that star role.
I mean, of being developers, architects?
That, or being the kind of dilettante architect who thinks that they can design a chair in 15 minutes and
Yeah.
it'll be great.
Mm-hmm.
It may be great, but it's not.
But everyone knows Richard Meyer takes 20 minutes. So
Right.
Well, it may be that we're flat-footed, but it seems like the work of design is more than the inspiration of design.
And that probably goes back to the early start of working with the materials and really
Right.
having a real feel for what it takes to put stuff together.
Well, your work is wonderfully free of ideology without being indifferent to ideas. I mean, I think that might be one way to. I mean, it is not intellectually thin, but it is not bound by rigid dogma or ideology.
Well, along those lines, I think that the other client that we don't get, the other client who doesn't come to us, is the client who wants an ideology, who wants
Right.
a way of designing. If you want a Charlie Gwathmey house, you go to Charlie Gwathmey, you're fairly confident of what you're going to wind up with.
Mm-hmm.
When clients come to us, they are very put off by the fact that they don't know what we're going to give them. We're going to sit down with them and we're going to glean things from their fantasies, and we're going to glean things from the piece of property, and we're going to come up with a design solution that we think answers the criteria of the times and of their needs. But it's very frightening that they have no idea what that's going to look like or what the ideology is behind it. So.
And sometimes I wonder to myself that when the latest Richard Meyer gem comes out in the magazines, I say to myself, well, maybe the right way to work is to keep honing the ideas that you had at the beginning to create these exquisite pieces of sculpture that are architecture. But we haven't chosen that path. It's still pretty fresh. Every time we come to it, we try and start and put our biases
Aside.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And I think we'd like to do a Richard Meyer house sometime. And we'd like to do whatever, a deconstruction of this house. But it seems to us that that you shouldn't mistake strategies
Mm-hmm.
for designing, for ideas. Mistake strategies of architecture for the ideal of architecture. There is not, in my mind, an ideal type or an ideal way of thinking that is the solution to all building.
Carl and I were talking last week after I saw John Portman talk about how you handle neighborhoods. His attitude was, well, gosh, you take 6 blocks and you use the same vocabulary in there, and somehow you've unified the city. I guess if I were presented with 6 blocks, my reaction would be exactly the opposite. That that isn't the way to make a wonderful city. That you try and use different vocabularies.
I would be surprised if your reaction were similar to John Portman's on almost anything, actually.
Well, we've never done a Portman hotel either. That might be fun.
But your sense is, I mean, in a sense, it sounds to me as what you're saying is you come to clients and their agenda is as important as any predetermined agenda that you might have, and that your role is to give visual and physical form to ideas that are theirs as much as your own predetermined ones.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right. Okay.
Well, and we try to be curious.
Right.
We're curious, and we like to think that clients are part of the way that ideas get to us and pressures get to us.
Right.
And those pressures are good. There are economic pressures. There are pressures of trendiness. We like to see what's in the magazines, and we're interested in other architects and what they're doing, and that's another pressure that
Sure.
comes to us.
Sure.
So we try to be quick enough on our feet to be open to
Right.
ideas wherever they come from.
And there are common threads that run through your work, I think. I mean, it would not be fair to describe it merely as the solving of problems, which would suggest that it's all over the map, because it's not. I mean, there are characteristic BumpZoid elements.
Bumps and
Bumps and zoids and so forth, right, exactly. Whose work do you either admire or find distressing or find most intriguing right now?
Well, I've always been a Jim Sterling fan. I think he's one of the most talented living architects.
as well as a teacher of ours. So.
Oh, that's right. He was at Yale in the days when you were.
Right.
Was he in a? Is it fair to say he was really the major influence on your work, or to the extent that there was one? I never thought of your work in connection with Sterling, but it sort of makes
he's
sense.
Certainly our major teacher, I think.
Uh-huh.
He's very good at teaching the art of architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I think I have enormous respect for him on that level. I don't think our work really. I once said, "Well, gee, I'd like to come work for you," and he knew me well enough to say, "No, you wouldn't." He's really a very interesting practitioner, I think, and continues to change and grow. His
very much
his
so,
work
sure.
doesn't have that.
Right. Have you been to Stuttgart?
No, I haven't been
Yeah,
there.
it's incredible. Yeah. That's I think the greatest building of the '80s in some ways. Really is extraordinary. Anyone else who particularly significant?
Izasaki, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that has been doing the same things we've been doing. I mean, it's when he was influenced by when he was interested in Palladio, we were interested in Palladio. When he's interested in Marilyn Monroe, we've been interested in Squiggles.
Mm-hmm.
And pyramids, we've been trying to build pyramids for years. Anyway, there's a certain formal inventiveness that I guess we find fascinating and like and try to use in some way.
Great. What about figures you find distressing, off-putting, or anything else? Do you feel like being discreet or indiscreet?
Well, I guess the only way to explain not taking pot shots is that as time goes on, the things that 10 years ago I thought were extraordinarily ugly, I sometimes find interesting and attractive now. And
Such as. You've got to say that then if you want anything now. Any examples?
No,
Okay. Okay. I get the point, however. This is a good time, I think, to turn to some questions from any or all of you for the last few minutes, either on some of the stuff we've been talking about, or we can ramble on off any tangents. Yes, sir, in the front.
Could you speak about Manhattan Eruptus?
What we showed tonight was built work and images of built work. Part of what we do often is try to keep up some level of theoretical work. Sometimes this is we're working on a book of the curvilinear, a way to describe curves. Manhattan Eruptus came about as something that we did for fun to get a group of young architects together to talk about urbanism and to talk about Manhattan. I cut up the subway map and mailed it out to 12 groups of young architects and asked them to comment on what they thought might be done with Manhattan without on a wholesale level. What you have in your hand is the small piece of Manhattan that BumpZoid dove into, and we've tried to make a series of wholesale, arbitrary changes in the city because we thought that there is no way to address that issue unless you address it arrogantly. And on the other hand, we wanted to maybe suggest some smaller, more subtle changes within the city that might improve its context. It is purely a theoretical exercise as such, but we, from time to time, try to do those kinds of things to get away from the profession as we've been talking about it up here.
Who were some of the other architects who participated?
Let's see.
David Sellers in Vermont had a piece. Woody Rainey and Bill McDonough had a piece. Red Roof.
Red Roof Design.
Red Roof had a piece.
Sydenham Halsey.
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
Farouk Jorgen Soglo.
Yeah.
Who was working with Eisenman.
Mm-hmm.
Several other.
What came out of it that you think is memorable? Can you just say a little more about your own proposal for it?
Well, probably what was not most memorable was our proposal. We took our proposal a little farther than most and thought it was important to at least draw up what we had done. The original map was drawn at a scale that yielded Manhattan 35 feet long. Mm-hmm. And everyone was drawing at 1 inch equals 200 feet, so everyone had a big section like this. And we would get together and lay out all of our proposals on the floor for the 35 feet, which included, there were some schemes which were the Hollywooding of the Upper East Side, which was sort of tours of the stars. There were serious there was a section on the village which reduced the entire village to one villa, so that each part of that villa, the restaurant zone became the kitchen, etc. And the fascinating part was really just seeing these sort of half-baked ideas.
Wall Street was paved with gold.
Right. Fascinating system of transportation of new bridges and tunnels that was suggested by one group that were laid across. And then a lot of time fighting over what would come out of this. Was there any way for 12 groups of architects to do anything at the interstices, mm-hmm. to have any of these things meet? Mm-hmm. And except for the suggestion of a bike path, which was roundly denounced as bourgeois.
As bourgeois, right.
Nothing, in fact, came of it. But what was most interesting was, in fact, that 12 architects, 12 groups could see, first thought that there were problems with Manhattan, mm-hmm. then had thoughts for solving them, some of those problems, and that those problems didn't join in any way at all. I mean, that the solutions just budded and created their own problems. Our best suggestion was linking Avenue C with Roosevelt Island. It goes straight up, turning the east part of the East River into a lagoon for
it solves the problem of the Delacorte fountain pretty neatly, actually, doesn't it?
Well, we thought it was a way to get there and repair it anyway.
Yeah.
Causeway that you could ride along on Sunday afternoons on your bike.
Therefore, solving the problem of the tram also, and the non-existent subway. I mean, it sort of has, Great. Yes, sir. Middle.
In the context of what you just described, could you perhaps be a little more site-specific in
known as Television City to be built, and or a place like the South Bronx, which is level ground, yet has the necessary grid pattern, facilities, and other things under it that one could go about creating an urban environment as you described, but they're very site-specific.
Do you want South Bronx or Television City? In some sense, that's an enormous question. And what we tried to do in this little brochure of work we did years ago and have given out as trick-or-treat favors now, a site-specific solution is required for Television City. That, however, does not suggest to me that it has to be a reactionary contextual answer. It doesn't have to purely react. Any new project in Manhattan or in New York City has to inspire. Part of what New York is all about is pushing people, is inspiration, is pushing them a little farther. And I think that I have no idea what I might design for or suggest would be the proper solution to Television City. But I think it must be contextual. It must be about the city and the grid and the specific neighborhoods that abut that area, and it must be about the water and the railroad problems, which are integral problems that have to be addressed. On the other hand, it must have an inspirational component, and that is where you have to push a little farther. And then I think that's why we suggest that maybe arrogance is not always completely out of place in New York City.
I like that, actually. I think it's true. I think that there's been a tendency in the last couple of years to interpret the idea of contextualism or contextual response as a kind of coy literalness, and sort of a sweet safety rather than anything else. And that's an understandable reaction against the violence that's been done by so much anti-contextual work in the last generation, but it's also excessive. I mean, one can imagine by the current thinking of contextualism, we would have had no Empire State Building, we would have had no Chrysler Building, we would not have had a lot of things. I mean, there are moments when bold gestures are significant and defensible. I think the problem with Television City has been that the particular bold gestures that have been proposed thus far are idiotic. But the boldness is not the problem, the gestures themselves are the problem, I think.
But I'd hate to see the pendulum swing completely the other way, that's all.
Yeah, and there are forces that would like to see the Television City site developed as rows of brownstones or 8-story apartment buildings, which, particularly given the fact that the unfortunate truth is that by virtue of Lincoln Towers, it's cut off from the so-called context of the Upper West Side anyway, it becomes even more problematic, I would say. Ben, do you want to talk about the South Bronx at all in response to the rest of the question?
Well, I think it's a very tricky question that certainly we, in our work, haven't addressed. And I'm not sure. I think it's the same trick question that we turn clients down on all the time. I think it's one of those.
South Bronx, 15 minutes,
right,
no problem.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that takes tremendous thought and energy. There's no doubt in my mind that the problem is a design problem, and that the solution has to be a designed solution. And I feel that saying that, oh, we'll just put a bunch of trailers there, or oh, we've got this great building system that'll work out fine, is not the way to do it. That there is some inspiration and thought required to solve what seems at this point to be an insoluble problem.
And some real money is required. I guess it's a social problem as well, and I think it's a mistake to think that architectural solutions will solve social problems. I don't think, for example, that architects should lead the way in building cheap housing. I think public housing should cost more than private housing. I think it should be built better. It should be built as an example to the public. It should be built as an example. So I think more money should be spent. I think architecture should be more expensive. I think buildings should be built for 300 years and not for 30 years. As an architect, I have no control over those economics. I have no control over the land use questions in New York City. And I have very little control over the zoning excess and misuse. So certainly, in our minds, a large part of the problem is not purely an architectural problem, but a social priority question.
You know that great comment of Mies? Mies van der Rohe did one housing scheme many, many years ago, I believe, for Chicago in his early years there. And it was, as all of his work was, very, very beautiful, and it was presented to the authorities, and they said, well, this is all very beautiful, but the workers will never be able to afford it. And he said, then give the workers more money. I mean, that's effectively what you're saying. And
Yes.
I think that it's true, although, of course, while it is not the architect's responsibility to give the workers more money, it underscores the fact that these things are intimately connected and cannot really be viewed. Architecture cannot be viewed apart from these things. These other things, on the other hand, cannot be viewed apart from architecture either.
Well, but it seems, though, that it is part of the business of being an architect to be able to convince people that they must spend more money in the places where the problems are the most difficult.
Let's go to some others. Yes, sir. There.
Would you care to discuss the role and how you feel about color in applied or in materials in the design work?
The question for those who didn't hear it was, would you discuss the role of color in your design work or in design in general?
When we started working, color was paint, but as the palette of materials has broadened, we try. Color is part of the problem of light, and we try in many ways to use light in our work. It's something that's one color changes as the day progresses, and we try and take that into account. The psychology of color is something that we try and stay away from. Pretty much we limit it to whether it will be beautiful or not in the varying kinds of light that it's observed.
Any others? Yes.
You say you want to reflect your clients in their work, in their home, in their office. And obviously you've done it because they all look so different. I must say I'm terribly curious about the two elderly ladies with the film. Tell me what was the spirit?
Were they your grandmothers or?
No, well, they were sisters, in fact.
Not of ours.
None of ours, but sisters of and mother and aunt of another client of ours. We had a wonderful time with them. We went to visit them in their former house in Rochester. We flew up and they made us cherry pie and treated us like lost grandchildren, and then drove us to the airport, which was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. And we immediately decided that the garage had to be very close to the front door. More seriously, they said that the house had to be built for $100,000. The house had to be built. A local builder in Virginia had told them that he could build them a 4-bedroom house for $100,000, and that he had certain materials that he liked using. We said that fine. We were willing to work with the Dutch mold siding, the Anderson windows, and a fairly strict floor plan, and that we would build the house for $100,000. Admittedly, we did sneak the Sphinx in on them. Their house in Rochester had a stone gable, and they did say that, well, the house had to cost $100,000, but they would like to have some stone on the front of the house to remind them of their old house. And they like stone, and that would be the only splurge. That stone gable became a pyramid rising out of the ground. The two-car garage, the garage, and actually screen porch became the two arms of the Sphinx, and lo and behold, the 50-foot antenna, which was also part of the program, became the tail. The humor was ours, and maybe at their expense, but I think that in all other ways it reflected what they had asked us for, and they seemed quite pleased in the end with the little bit of stone and with the layout of the house and the materials.
What year was it done?
5 years ago.
And they're still there.
Yes. They now get along in golf carts.
Yeah, they don't drive anymore except the golf cart.
A blessing, it sounds like. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Going back to your statement about how you treat light, one of the things that intrigued me about the designs you showed was the large areas of penetration. You didn't show as many interiors, especially the house we just spoke about, but I can imagine the light flooding in. Is that something that you've developed that you like to put in your designs, like in the law office, having the outside corridor so the occupants can experience the natural daylight? Or is that something that clients brought to you and said that's what we want?
No, as a rule, we try and get the inside out as much as possible, outside in, depending on how you look at it. We think that's important. There are all kinds of limitations about doing that, though. Most of them energy limitations. There are enormous demands put on your air conditioning system, and depending on the climate, enormous demands put on your heating system by these things. We're currently doing a house on Long Island that has a huge expanse of glass that we think we've made an energy gain in the winter, and think we've protected it from the energy problem, insulation problem in the summertime. So yeah, it's light's an important thing, and the change of light and the change of shadow as the day goes on. And there are all kinds of other issues that come along with it, though.
It probably has made us make more long, skinny buildings than most architects. The houses all seem to stretch out in a way that allows rooms to have sort of a front and back exposure, and allows everyone to get the south light or view. And in interiors, it's just a constant struggle. I mean, Manhattan, apartment planning in Manhattan is a struggle towards light. I mean, you get interior spaces, and you go through all kinds of contortions to get your living space either out towards the light or get the light deeper into the space.
Yeah, even that porch of that house in Connecticut that you showed, it was like a finger stretching out from the house with 3 sides exposed.
That actually came about because of our inability to do a kitchen facade. It's almost an impossible architectural problem. You take the counter and the upper cabinets, and you end up putting these little windows between them on the elevation. So we just wrapped the whole kitchen with porch and made the elevation porch. It was much simpler.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
Say something about the quality of craftsmanship is so apparent in your work. I mean, we all feel that the quality of craftsmanship has gone down over the years, and your stuff seems to be sort of impeccable. And how do you elicit that quality of craftsmanship? What goes into it?
We do a whole lot of supervision. It's not true that craftsmanship is dead. the unions, the trades in New York City are capable of beautiful craftsmanship, as well as the leftover 60s children in the country who've turned their attention to that sort of thing. But you have to demand it, and you have to be out there.
And be able to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, true. But you have to be out there once a week saying to the guy, hey, that's not acceptable. You can do better than that. And you have to search for the people who can do better and demand that they're the ones that do the stuff that's hard to do.
You build up a stable of your regular people that you use?
Well, an important part is knowing what you can demand.
Right.
We don't demand steel work from woodworkers. You know, we don't
That's
ask for
very wise.
I mean, we don't ask for the strength of steel. From
right.
And having done a little bit of it ourselves and getting to know these people, knowing how you can push them and get them curious and still get things that you know that they can build within their powers without having to go always to exorbitant expense means that you can get things built well.
And we also ask our clients to experiment. We will say to them, look, we'd like you to spend some money in this particular area to get a level of craft that we haven't experienced before doing this particular thing. Will you spend a little bit of extra money to put some special attention here? And that by continuing to experiment, that ends up working to our advantage too.
Good. Any others? Yes.
From the work you showed tonight, most of the stuff you're doing in Manhattan is really interiors. And I'd like to know if you're as excited and happy doing those as you are doing houses.
No.
When you
working between floor and ceiling in Manhattan has obvious limitations. We derive a great deal of pleasure and fun when we can from those apartments, and we love exploring materials and questions of light and color because there are certain things that you can do and you can play with because your palette is limited. Building from scratch is always the preference, I suppose.
But it would be tough to imagine doing only one thing. In our office at one time, we're always working on buildings that sit by themselves in the green grass at the same time we're doing interiors. And
Any exterior architecture in Manhattan?
not built on the island of Manhattan at the moment, but there's always something going on that is unto itself. And that's a nice mix to have in the office all the time.
We have time for one or two more. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could define an architect and define an artist, and then maybe tell us where you are in between one way or the other.
Carl?
Yeah, well, funny you should ask. You know, I think the difference between an artist and an architect is that we leave it out in the rain. That's to paraphrase a Vince Scully story about Frank Lloyd Wright talking about Philip Johnson.
Right.
I have very little tolerance for the art world today. I think any art that has to be locked up in a lightless room is not worthy of the name of art. It's probably why I haven't gotten any museum commissions. I find most art silly and pretentious. Architecture is stuff that sits out in the rain, it gets kicked, it gets used. Art that can answer those kind of questions and still provide inspiration, which is the other component, is art in my book. That's the difference I see between architecture and art.
Ben?
Yeah, I have a little gentler view of that issue. I think that every architect has to be in some way an artist. I don't mean that like Le Corbusier you have to paint, or John Portman for that matter, sculpt. But I think that you do have to, architecture is a practical art, and you do have to bring something that seeks a little bit higher plane than the ordinary in order to distinguish your work and in order to grow. And so I hesitate to call what we do at the office art, but certainly we aspire towards making our work art.
I think that's actually as nice a final word as we could ask for. Thank you all for being here. I hope you can join us next week, and thank you, Ben and Carl.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.